As a professional hardcore gamer, Yoshi in the Mysterious Book has been an interesting game to watch unfold. So much of the discourse in the gamer circles online has revolved around this idea that in order for platformers to have value, they need to be, and I quote, challenging. And this, like most gaming discourse, led to me building a mental web of why that's dumb, but also not entirely meritless. And that expanded to include more games and went to places that transcend gaming in ways I didn't immediately piece together with my initial reaction. And I want to untangle that web here. Let's talk about what value in video games actually means, why it matters, when it matters, and how in the grand scheme of things, you don't need to care about it, but it will ultimately impact you for better or worse as someone that cares about gaming. As Nintendo Switch 2's first full year on the market comes to a close, Yoshi in the Mysterious Book plants its flag in the sand as one of the platform's year one titles. I would say for the better, as it objectively gives us a marquee experience from Nintendo that is fundamentally different from anything else they've done on the platform that can be someone's new favorite for any number of reasons. Despite that, this idea that it's not worth buying because it's not super try-hard challenging plagues this game. And I strongly disagree, and that's mostly because the idea that the value of games in general is tied to how challenging they are can be applied to almost every genre in the history of the medium. But platformers especially are plagued by this in a way that other genres aren't typically. And that's in the sense that with Nintendo in particular, certain franchises have the expectation that the value from them, games like Mario and Donkey Kong, is that they are challenging. And the value of franchises like Kirby and Yoshi has been that they are inherently unchallenging. This has led to these franchises that actually intend to be approachable and enjoyable for all becoming deemed by fans and detractors alike as beginner games, or in other terms, baby's first platformer, for example. This description has always been bad from all angles because it shows a profound ignorance of both children, because it has become a gamer thing to reach a certain age and be weird about kids and how to engage with them as well-adjusted people, and of the vast majority of people that buy and play games in all genres, which are people in their 30s, most of whom, believe it or not, aren't very good at video games, and as a result aren't always looking at how challenging a game is as a value proposition. I've spoken about this before, but if we're being honest, challenge being seen as this objective metric of value is a holdover from the arcade era and even blockbuster era of gaming. It's a relatively cheap way to add length to a player's time with a given game. Pointing this out, by the way, isn't to suggest the opposite is true. This is a way to offer people genuine value. If you're the type of person that finds it fun and rewarding to grind to beat something that at one point felt unbeatable, more power to you. That's valid. And there's definitely a conversation to be had for the length of a game potentially attributing to the value of the overall package for players of the game. That will be relevant later. But for this section, I'll just say this view of value in games, just like any other, is just as subjective as anything else. And the high concentration of people that align with this thinking is only really proof that this industry was founded on that framework, not that it's any more valid than anything else that you can't find a large swath of gamers screaming at the top of their lungs online. That doesn't mean it's the only one that exists now. In fact, this industry would have stagnated a long time ago if it was. People play games for a lot more reasons than high score climbing and bragging rights to your friend group these days. That said, there does need to be something to hook people in. And I contend, based on everything I've seen so far from Yoshi in the Mysterious Book, it does have something of value. Clever mechanics don't need to be gamer highlight reel worthy to be enjoyable to engage with. They can simply be inventive and thereby spark players' curiosity. I think that's the angle this game is going for, and personally, it's the main reason I'm interested in it in the first place. I love how Yoshi in the Mysterious Book introduces new mechanics and mixes those with mechanics from past levels and their central mechanics. To me, it feels like playing a Metroidvania without the aimless wandering. I've only really dug deep into the first chapter, and already I've encountered interesting ideas this game presents and reinvents in ways I didn't expect. Just as much as I can appreciate a game for its challenge, I appreciate games having the desire to present new ideas, and this game has that in spades. This industry is plagued by the creatively bankrupt gamers that believe the only way anything can be good is if it's in some way derivative of something that's been proven to be successful elsewhere. I, on the other hand, am way more interested in the origin of successful formulas. I rather give new ideas a chance than to write them off for not scratching a familiar itch. Does that need to be for you? Absolutely not. Does it not being for you mean it lacks value? No. And who knows, maybe this particular game will end up missing the mark for even its target audience, being people that like the character, the game's mechanics, aesthetic, and so on, not the demographic gamers have grafted onto it. But that's something we can't know until the numbers are in. I know that to me, a game that aims to surprise the player through unique platforming mechanics, a charming presentation with unique set pieces, and an art style that breaks up an otherwise hyper-dated, monotonous medium is a welcome addition to my library. And trust me, I am generally a gameplay first type of guy, and more often than not, I tend to gravitate towards games that are seen as challenging by most. But I don't require a game to be that in order for me to see value in it. I also see the value in experience outside of that, and I openly welcome, no, I low-key demand developers to strive to invent even more ways for a given game to win me over. That said, there are games that I think fall short of that, and there's a topical example we can dive into next. Mixtape is the latest game to be unfortunately cast as an industry psyop, and I say that as someone whose blood boils whenever I see someone complain about woke, yet another term that has been co-opted and corrupted by right-wing figureheads and subsequently adopted by the general public as a catch-all term for anything they deem to be too politically correct. Given the history and actual meaning of the term, it doesn't get more insidious than that. I mention that to say, on the internet, liking or disliking Mixtape has become less about the actual quality of the product and more about what side of the proverbial aisle you stand on. But I, for one, refuse to discuss the game from that framework, mostly because it doesn't even fit that narrative in most respects. This game is as far from the idea of breaking the status quo as possible in more areas than not, sans the protagonist not being a white dude, instead opting for a white girl. Outside of that, it's a nostalgia bait fest for a very particular experience that defenders of the game either claim is universal or should at least be relatable because media has made that experience seem like a default in America, which I contend is counter to the entire point of improving representation in the first place. All of that said, I don't hate Mixtape. I think the game is mid in the most traditional sense, nothing to rage over, nothing to write home about. It's a roughly 3-hour long narrative focused game with little to no gameplay. A fact I'm actually okay with since the game's price does reflect that. I'd pay around 20 bucks to watch a movie, so 20 bucks to play one doesn't seem egregious in my opinion. The story itself is derivative and therefore predictable, but the soundtrack driving its plot forward is a novel concept that gives Mixtape a level of uniqueness that I appreciate, even if neither of which resonates with me personally. That said, I will say I would have enjoyed this game a lot less had I played this game off stream. A lot of the fun I did have came from consulting my friends and viewers in the chat. Oh, MTV taping it.
You gotta be close to the bleeding.
That do something for you, Trev. The CD skipping, that do something for you, Trev. Doing something for you, Trev. The video game, yo, dead ass. This will not be the last time I say that. That I knew could relate to the nostalgia bait in game, and seeing them even acknowledge how corny a lot of it is. Ew. What the type of aggressively white. And it does help that I'm at least old enough to have been in a Blockbuster and that I too have mixed slushy flavors in a gas station. That's not necessarily anything that gets my dopamine running, because I think nostalgia bait is actively annoying and I would prefer new experiences and new ideas and new things to be excited about. But I somewhat digress. I can see why people who live similar lives to the characters in this game appreciate it. I think the Game of the Year conversations around it are forced. I can see why people that don't like this game don't like it, but the assertion that it's the worst thing to ever exist, that's only being pushed on us because games journalists are paid shills, is stupid. I believe this game genuinely resonates with games journalists because that world is dominated by the demographic this game was made for and by: white dudes between the ages of 30 to 45. I think people in general are hyper nostalgic because the world sucks as you get older. I think people in this demographic are particularly susceptible to this, and that's the perfect storm for a game like this that is full of nostalgia bait to blow up and be embraced by people in this demo. Whether they have had some level of exposure to people outside of that experience and have grown from it or not, in my experience, there tends to be some level of pining for times when their world catered to them more and it was harder to see the negative impact that that centering had on other people. And that's not just a race thing, it's a socio-economical one. This game caters to people in a bubble. I don't think this game has much to offer people outside of it, or at best, people in community with people like that. And while I think that's okay, mostly, being cognizant of that is important. I think it's cool that they had a black girl in the video game. I think it's telling that I didn't interact with her until the last section of the video game. And to me, it is a good representation of how I feel about the game overall. It does try to present itself as universal, but its attempt at trying to appeal to people outside of who the bulk of the game is speaking to me, felt like an afterthought in an attempt to say it's inclusive on some level. That said, I maintain this game too has value, and I'm happy it exists for the people in that bubble, especially since this isn't some big budget console manufacturer helmed prestige piece. It's a small indie game, and if that space is good for anything, it's offering deeply personal, weird little experiments that would be a lot harder for bigger teams to justify due to that hyper specificity. That brings me to StarFox 2026. StarFox is textbook #1 nostalgia bait. Even the biggest offenders of this game lead by saying remaking this same unchanged formula for the 5th time in the franchise's history makes sense because it's the formula that sold the most for the franchise. Mind you, these sales figures aren't some Mario level record-breaking numbers. StarFox 64 sold 4.02 million units. Even if we combine the 3DS remake, a platform that has an installed base of nearly 76 million for the record, the StarFox 64 sales figure grand total is 5.1 million units. While Metroid has been on the chopping block for most of its life for similar numbers, but because Miyamoto holds this one near and dear, we just get rehashes of this game once per decade. At minimum. I get people are nostalgic for it. I get there are people that may not have even played the game that are nostalgic for the aesthetic of the original SNES game's marketing. That's all well and good, but I'd be shocked if that wasn't a vocal minority of people that know who Fox McCloud is. And hey, I could be wrong. Maybe this time will be different somehow. Maybe the 5th time's the charm, and what the masses actually wanted was for StarFox 64 to be 4K or whatever, but I doubt it. I'll say, I don't think StarFox 2026 is without value either. I get that people that played and have nostalgia for that formula enjoy the game. I do think, although they will be the minority by a lot, there will be a contingent of new players that enjoy the game just as much as those people without the context in the nostalgia. I even think some aspects of the game are appealing and might have won me over if it was an impulse buy territory video game at like $30. The VTuber game chat feature would be fun to mess with for a day and could potentially result in some fun short form content. The 4v4 online multiplayer is cool and could have made for a fun stream or two. I remain a fan of games having worthwhile game share support. And even with this game not being for me, I'm still ultimately fine with it because Switch 2 has kept me thoroughly satisfied since release. I can use a month without a first party release I care about to catch up on the ones I do. Selfishly, as someone that cares about the world and its characters and wants to see StarFox grow, I will continue to cross my fingers that something bigger and better follows, like it's rumored to be happening. But even if that's not the case, I'll be totally fine regardless. And that brings me to presenting the overarching theme I'm driving to for this video in plain language. It's possible to feel any way you want to feel about a given game and express those feelings in a non-toxic way. The games I talked about here run the gamut for me. One is a game I feel is for me. Another is a game I feel ultimately indifferent towards. And the final is a game that I feel is actively not for me. You may feel differently about all three, and that's okay. The point of this video isn't for the validation of having people +1 my opinions, positive or otherwise, but rather the intent of this video is to attempt to present a healthy way to discuss things you like or dislike on the internet or otherwise. Because whether people want to acknowledge it or not, one will always bleed into the other. I don't think you need to love everything. I don't care if you hate something I love. Something not being for you doesn't mean it won't have value to others, and the opposite is also true. Things you like aren't necessarily going to feel worthwhile for others, and while I do think pundits like myself should factor popular opinion into what games they highlight, the vast majority of gamers caring about how popular or unpopular a given game is a waste of everyone's time and energy. I just want people to be intellectually honest in their love, hate, or indifference for a given thing. I know I try to be. Check out my last video about the state of online gaming discourse called Negativity Isn't Honesty. If you like this, you'll love that. Thank you to paid members over at shop.watchredirect.com like Trev L. Steinberg for making this video possible. Hit the link in the description to join in the credits of every video and in receiving physical and digital perks.